What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 4 of Between Two Dumbbells. Today, we have a Mr. William Kuehl. He is one of the exercise science professors here. He's been here working at GCU since August 24th, 1990. So he's coming up on his, what number is that again?
Oh,
Anniversary?
34.
34 years that he's worked here, which is crazy. Um, Bill, thank you for being here with us.
Mhm.
Um, you have quite the intro and quite the background here, so I'll let you kind of dive into more of that. What made you get into this field, and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Well, it's actually a pretty Christian way of doing things. And I don't believe that in order to be a Christian, you have to basically be struck down on the road to Damascus. But I had an experience very much like that. It was the summer before my freshman year of high school. And I had played sports. I'd played baseball and basketball in seventh and eighth grade. And I kind of got the message fairly early on in my eighth grade year that probably I wasn't going to be able to make high school teams. In fact, in basketball, it's only because the basketball coach really liked me that I got a uniform at all. I hardly got to play, but I was one of those people that was I mean, I showed up to every practice. I practiced up and down. I practiced really hard. I was a great bench person and things like that. So they kept me around because of my attitude. But he had me talk to the athletic director and for high school, and that person said to me, um, "You probably aren't going to be able to make the freshman team." And the deal was, I was going to enter high school at the age of 13, just turning 13, and most of the people in the freshman class, of course, were 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
So there was no way, unless I was a really gifted athlete, that I was going to be able to make teams. And so he said, there's kind of a new thing for us. A couple of years ago, we got an athletic trainer. And have you ever thought about that? So I did a little investigation and found out that I could start as a freshman. They actually had a very unusual thing for high school. In my high school, they had a certified athletic trainer there. And this was 5 years before the national certification exam. It was the summer of 1965. And so I said that I wanted to do that. And they said, we're going to send you a summer course. So Kramer Corporation, which makes a lot of the athletic supplies and so forth, they've had what's called the First Aider magazine, and they had a course, a correspondence course that you could take that gave you kind of a background. And that's what they required of people to be able to enter their athletic training program. So I took this 6-part course. And while I was taking it, I was really trying to decide if this was what I wanted to do. And I was sitting in my living room one day and just staring at that. And I was almost thinking, this looks like a lot of work. I don't think this is what I want to do. And this voice boomed at me, this is what you should be doing. Incredibly loud. It knocked me out of my chair. I found myself sitting on the floor. There was no one else in the house. But that was my message, I believe, that I was to be doing this. And I changed my mind completely and just started down that road, and I've never looked back.
Do you think that was God talking to you?
That's what I believe. I believe that was the voice of the Lord. I've heard it one other time in my life too, for a different reason, but that's what I believe started me on all of this. And it is kind of that was it, I received my certificate and an assembly. That's the way they did my high school did it was at that right the very first assembly of the fall. It was in like the second or third week of September. They had people who received various certificates, awards, things like that, and they called me up to receive my Kramer certificate for passing the summer course. I
Yeah.
still have my certificate that was dated September 1st, 1965. So you think about that time frame.
I bet things were so different back then too,
Oh
even
yeah.
with the
I
certificate.
mean, for example, I predated CPR. We basically, that was an era where we did, you put the person on their stomach and did chest compression or back compression, arm raises, back compressions, arm raises. We didn't do rescue breathing. We didn't do CPR the way we know it now with the chest compressions and things like that. That didn't come along for another 5 years.
If I saw
So
somebody doing that now, I'd be like, "What are you doing?"
that's it. And and I never looked back. I had an opportunity. Actually, the very first chance I had to take a CPR course there were so few places in Illinois to take that I had to go 130 miles north of Champaign to Chanute Air Force Base. Even the University of Illinois didn't have anyone who could teach CPR, who was a certified instructor at the entire University of Illinois. So I managed to take the course from the Air Force had decided that they were going to go and have all of their medics certified in CPR training. And that had been just a couple of years before that. And so I went up there and took a CPR course. I still got my card. It was some month or whatever in 1974 that I actually passed CPR. And then I've been certified to try to keep that continuous ever since 1974 that I'm certified in CPR. It's actually called first responder now. But
So going back to summer of 1965, during that time, so you got your certificate in high school. What did you do with it, like right after from there?
well, I kept on doing high school athletic training,
Uh-huh.
and I did that all the way through high school. I generally wanted to take the jobs that nobody else wanted. They had a very popular basketball program. You know, these little towns. Moline, Illinois, was a city of about 50,000, but their field house sat 8,000 for basketball. You know, Illinois, Indiana, they just that basketball is just this incredible thing, especially from high school all the way on up. And I decided that I wanted to help the people that needed me but weren't in front of all the spotlight. I've always tried to dodge the spotlight. So I wound up um, helping the wrestling team from the time I was a sophomore. And it turned out that it was kind of a blessing in disguise because um, the wrestling team turned out to be really, really good, not as when I was a sophomore, but when I was a junior. Had some people that just were outstanding, and the basketball team was just so-so. And so I ended up being able to be part of a state wrestling championship for Moline High School, the very first and only one they've ever won. So it was, and they had I think it was like 138, and then their heavyweight. It was. I'll just briefly explain this. I know it's a little off target, but um, it got the state championships came down to the heavyweight match, and North Chicago and Moline were tied. And or actually, it was a case where if our heavyweight won, we would be tied. So he had to win, and he was wrestling a guy from, gosh, I think it was Wheaton. It was Wheaton, one of the Wheaton high schools, and he was two times state champion at heavyweight. And our heavyweight, in order to win, he not only had to win, but he had to pin his guy. Mm. And he actually lifted him up by under his arms and threw him around on the ground and laid on top of him and pinned him with 28 seconds left in the match. And we ended up winning the state championship by 1 point.
No way.
So it was just one of those kind of miraculous things that I was part of very early on.
One of those movie moments that you got to experience early on.
Absolutely. I had a bunch of movie moments. I have some pictures in my office that are really interesting. Some of the things that happened when I was in college with the Augustana College in Rock Island. That basketball team made the Final Four, and they had some just miraculous things that went on in those seasons that I was with Augustana basketball. But so I had actually went to college with 4 years under a certified athletic trainer, and at Augustana we didn't have one. So actually, I had so much experience that I wound up almost taking over the entire thing as an athletic trainer. And it was very interesting because the coaches all, after the first week, said, you know a lot more about this than I do. You guys, you decide about the injuries. So there I was, a 17-year-old freshman, basically making all of these injury decisions for all the college sports. But that's the way it turned out for me.
How'd that work out looking back?
Well, I started a lot of things really early. I mean, I had developed a reputation at Augustana. And at the end of, it was actually in the middle of the semester of my freshman year, I got a call, and across the river was a franchise that was the A-ball team for the California Angels. And they didn't have an athletic trainer, and one wasn't going to come down at that time from the big club. They only had an athletic trainer for the main club and AAA, and that was all they had. And he said, we really see the value of an athletic trainer, and we'd like to know if you'd come over and do that for us for the summer. So I decided I would go ahead and give that a shot. And so here I am, 17 years old, becoming the athletic trainer for the Quad City Angels in Davenport, Iowa. And so I did that for the summer. It was a really fascinating experience too, to have all these 24 and 25-year-old guys, and there I was at 17, taking care of these injuries and things. And I guess I've sort of instilled trust in people, because after a couple of weeks, they relied on me to help them with just about anything that came up with them injury wise, because I studied it hard, I worked hard, and I was pretty good for that era. So anyway, that's what I did for that summer. I had to kind of not do it after that summer, because they needed me more for the football team, and that was where I was going to school and things like that. So I only did that for that one summer.
How much pressure was that for you with a bunch of 24, 25-year-olds, and you're the 17-year-old kid that comes in? Were you confident in your abilities?
Well, that's the question. And it was, and I got a little bit of exposure right at the tail end when the rookie people came to A after they'd finished their rookie league. But I didn't know it at the time. But that rookie team had Frank Tanana, Sid Manji, Andy Hassler. That rookie team had three guys who pitched long careers in the Major League Baseball, that were among Frank Tanana was one of the great pitchers of his era. And so here I was working with these guys, and at 17, I didn't know that I should be worried or I should be nervous. I didn't know enough to
Yeah.
know that I should be nervous about this stuff. So I really wasn't. Thinking back on it, I should have been a lot more nervous than I was, but I really didn't. I was kind of conservative. I didn't make any mistakes. So
It's a good problem to have.
yeah.
So most people in your shoes would be more nervous.
Hmm. Well, and by that time, I'd had some experience too. I mean, I'll tell you real quickly about the very first. Well, it was actually in the first coverage we had. Most of the time, when you got one athletic trainer, you can't cover the freshmen and the JVs and things like that. So, our freshman team went to play one of the freshman team for one of the other high schools, and it was in football. And one of their running backs went into the line and had a collision and ended up dropping to the ground and just laying still. So I followed what I was trained to do. I got out there at that particular time, and he was totally out cold. And we weren't sure if he was breathing, so we were taught at that time to always, in our athletic training kit, carry a pocket mirror. So had a pocket mirror, and I stuck it under the guy's mouth, and I could see steam. So I knew he was breathing. And so I said, well, he's out cold. Let's just wait a little bit to see if we can bring him around. At that time, we were told to use smelling salts on all of those, but I had read an article that we really shouldn't if we suspected a neck injury, because the first reaction to smelling salts is to do this. And so if you did that and you had a neck injury, you could make it a lot worse. So I said, let's just see if he wakes up. And so the head freshman coach, looked at me and said, "What do we do now?" And there I was, a 13-year-old freshman, and he's asking me, "What do we do now?"
No pressure.
No. So anyway, that's the kind of life I experienced through most of it. Is people that should never have been asking me those things have always asked me, "Well, what do I do now?" And for whatever reason, I usually knew the answer. So.
Do you think that made the rest of your field easier when you jumped around in your career, just being able to get really comfortable doing that and making those calls?
Oh yeah. I mean, before we didn't get the certification exam nationally until the fall of 1970. And so I didn't have enough. First of all, I was an undergrad, and you couldn't get certified until you at least graduated from college. So I wasn't even eligible till 73. And even then, national certification didn't really mean a whole lot. It wasn't restrictive. It wasn't like athletic training today in the state of Arizona has a license to practice. and people who don't have a license to practice can't practice athletic training. But back in that, well, it wasn't, for decades, there was no restriction on who could call themselves an athletic trainer and who couldn't, whether you passed the exam or not. So there wasn't that restriction as such when I was doing all of this. But I ended up with 16,000 hours by the time I took the certification exam. So these days, I mean, when we even had the internship program, we asked students to have 1,500. So it was just so much experience I had all the way through high school, all the way through college, and into my first year of graduate school.
I know in class you said for PT school, you want to have a certain amount of hours, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, that's so much. But then you're like, well, you don't want to have too many hours because these schools will look at you and think that you were so far one way that you're closed minded now.
Well, yeah, and that isn't universally true, but the thing is that most colleges, if you read their information, they say you need a 2.75 GPA. You need 100 hours under a physical therapist. Well, no one with a 2.75 GPA gets into PT school. That's the minimum requirements. Generally, they take everybody under a 3.0 and they stick them in this pile over here called the discard pile. And then everybody else is over on this side. And they have like a cutoff line at some point where these are the people that they actually look at seriously first. And these are the ones they might look at. And these are the ones that are going to get the rejection letter. And there's a secretary in the office that does this based on your numbers. So, and the same thing is true with hours. If you have 100 hours in PT, it's not enough. Most of the people they accept have 300 minimum, and I like to suggest 500 to 600. But the reasoning behind that is just as you had said. If you end up working under the same PT or the same PT group, say you've got a job there while you're going to college and things like that, and you put in 2,000 or 3,000 hours, you already have established in your brain the kind of PT you want to be. And a lot of these schools like to mold you and make you into their kind of a physical therapist. And so they feel like it's too many preconceived notions sometimes. And a lot of times they'll find out about that in the interview. They'll ask specific questions designed to find out how rigid you were. And that may make the difference between you getting accepted or not getting accepted if they look at that background that you've had, and then they decide, oh, if I, when I become a physical therapist, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it in this way, and I'm going to do it that way. And if that's really conflicting with the philosophy that they teach, they probably won't. Nobody has to give you a reason why they didn't accept you.
Right.
When it goes to these schools, it's just like, well, we didn't take you. We felt these other people were more qualified, and that's just the way it is.
Sometimes doing too much can be more harmful than beneficial.
Yes.
Would it be better if you still have a lot of hours, but you work for different PTs?
Well, that makes a whole difference too. Yes, if you can put in 200 or 300 hours with 5 different therapists each, then you can have 1,500, and it probably will be fine because now you're diverse. Now you've looked at a whole bunch of different ways of doing things, and now you aren't locked in. So that could make a difference too.
Should we go over static stretching?
Let's give it a shot.
Let's do it. Let's get into it, Bill. I'll let you lead that one.
Of course. So kind of taking a shift to the whole motor control aspect. I know we had previously talked about an appropriate amount of stimulus because we do need a little bit of pressure in what we do to achieve optimum performance. But staying along the lines of motor control and how this applies to our physiology, we have a lot of people, especially in the physical therapy field, talking about how important stretching is for both rehabilitative purposes and performance purposes. We have other people saying don't stretch for performance, only for rehabilitation. We have some people saying don't stretch at all. There's also a difference between static and chronic stretching. Where do you sit on this whole field of debate?
So first of all, the physical therapy research pretty clearly defines that in general, stretching prior to practices and games does not reduce injury rates. And it really doesn't make a lot of difference which type of stretching you do to a great extent. I'll get into the static stretching issues later, but that's the number one thing is, now should you stretch? Absolutely you should. It might be better after practice than before. That seems to get somewhat better results. But that doesn't mean you don't do warm-up what everybody is recommending now is what most people are doing. It's called dynamic warm-up. And that dynamic warm-up increases the temperature of the muscle, which actually makes them more loose and more flexible, and does seem to have an impact on injury rates simply because of that. So the dynamic warm-ups, and plus you are actually under rather controlled conditions, elongating things. If you look at like your high knee exercises and your karaokes and your things like that that you do in your dynamic warm-ups, you're actually extending the joints somewhat, but you're doing it in a controlled fashion, and you're doing it at kind of high speed, but you're not overstretching. And so therefore you're loosening up the muscles and getting them to a greater temperature. The warmer muscles are, the more flexible they are.
What? Go ahead.
Okay, there's a couple other premises that go in with this. And there's been a technique around for stretching since the 1950s, mostly done in physical therapy, but it's been branching out now to where a lot of other people do it. The basic principle behind it is called proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or PNF. But PNF is only one of several stretching techniques where you are basically trying to relax the muscle by using a contraction of its opposite. So for example, if I want to stretch the hamstrings, I will contract the hip flexors and the knee extensors, and I will use that to passively stretch the hamstring. So for example, the straight leg raise is a good way to do that, because as you're lifting the leg, the hip is flexing and the knee is locked in extension, and now you are lifting a muscle, the hamstring muscle. It's lengthening, but it's not contracting at the same time. Okay, so there's a bunch of different techniques you can use to make that happen. PNF is just one of them. PNF is mostly diagonal movement patterns and not in kinesiological planes and axes. In other words, it's not like a straight leg raise, but they are designed with the same principle, that you're contracting a muscle on one side to stretch its opposite. Now, that's contradictory to what is the typical static stretching. So if you talk about the hurdler stretch, which originally was an athlete on the track standing on one leg and putting the other heel up on a hurdle. That was why it was called the hurdler stretch originally. And then eventually they went down to the ground and you bent one leg up and you put out the other leg straight. And that then became a way of doing it without having a hurdle around. But if you look at which muscles are contracting against gravity, when you're in the hurdler stretch position, the leg that is out straight, the hamstring, is the anti-gravity muscle. No matter how far back you go, you really can't take the hamstring out of the position it is as an anti-gravity muscle. And anytime you go about past parallel, it is definitely. As you go down this way, the hamstring is letting you down eccentrically and coming back concentrically to get to neutral. So you're actually trying to stretch a muscle that's contracting back against you. That reaction is generally called the myotatic reflex. It's the one that protects the muscle from injury, and it's considered to be the most powerful of all the reflexes in the body. It will override practically anything else because it keeps the muscle from going beyond the amount of length it should have and thus tearing it. You can cause first microscopic tears, and if you do it extensively or if you do it all at once, suddenly you can get tears located specifically in parts of the muscle. You actually tear the muscle in one spot in a fairly significant fashion. Sometimes you can actually tear a muscle completely through. That does happen once in a while in sports. But we have to be careful not to get to the terminal end of the range with the muscle fighting back against you. And so that's what puts you in the position it puts you in the hurdler stretch. Well, there's evidence that doing that repeatedly or holding at the end of that actually makes the hamstring tonically active. So if you hook up to an EMG, when you get done, you can see the electrical activity in the hamstring that is tonically active. For a period of time afterward, for several minutes or so, you've got a tonically active muscle that technically is shorter than it was before you started stretching it. So the safe methods of stretching involve trying to get the muscles to relax. At least initially, you almost have to do that with a partner. So when I was doing it out on football fields and things like that, I would spend some time at the beginning trying to teach partner stretching. because then you get somebody assisting you, and then they assist you, and you go back and forth as partners, and you have some assistance or some help with doing those stretching exercises. It makes stretching more time consuming, but it also means that you really reduce your injury rates. I had a very tiny um, muscle strain injury rate in uh, in the high school football programs that I was involved with, and I've always been very proud of the fact in my 6 years that I did conditioning with the Suns, which was 79 to 85. That first 5 years, we had the lowest time lost injury rate in the NBA. We almost didn't have muscle strains. But John McLeod had me helping them do stretching exercises both before and after practice. And believe it or not, the players liked it so much after the first 2 or 3 weeks of the first year that they insisted on it, because back in the day when the NBA had a players union, they had locked in that you could not practice more than 2 hours. However, they needed the 2 hours to actually practice. So the team, the Suns team, voted unanimously to start practice 15 minutes earlier and end 8 minutes later, so they could do the before and after stretching, because they felt it was really helping them loosen up the muscles. The one afterwards was taking soreness away, which we find out does happen if you stretch afterward. A lot of times you can get rid of soreness that you develop during the practices and things. And so we did that, and they actually did it religiously. The players really tried hard to stretch. And because you get that sometimes where people just, you can see that out at high school programs all the time, that people are just, you guys might remember from high school, when you stretched, did you really do it seriously, or did you just go through the motions?
I don't think we did it seriously one time.
Yeah, yeah. And see, that's what happens. See, so it's not really helping much anyway, because you're not really trying to do it, and you have to have a mindset for that. Well, I was fortunately the team bought it. Hey, that's what you got to do. You got to figure out a way to get the team to buy it, and then they'll do it, and then they'll see the results, and then then it makes them want to keep doing it. You know how that works? It's a kind of a positive feedback mechanism.
It's compliance, but then it leads to consistency,
right?
And that's where you see your results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they did this all because of you.
Well, yeah. I mean, I instituted the stretching program with them when I got here. I was originally hired to be director of rehab for the old sports medicine clinic. That's how I came out here in the fall of '79, and to work in rehabilitation for Paul Steingartner, who's the team doctor of the Suns. So my main job and my salary was from that. I really didn't get paid much to do anything with the Suns, except that if they needed rehab, they came to our clinic, and generally I worked on them, or did a lot of that. And then I went down and tried to visit. The Jewish Community Center was where they practiced all the time. And I used to go up to camp at Yavapai College. In that era, they went to Yavapai College in Prescott to do their fall camp before the season started. So I would take a week and go up there and take them through conditioning. I would see, because generally if you go through a series of tests, you can see if your athlete is going to be prone to an injury in some way or another. You can look for differences between extremities. That's always a good thing to do, is paired extremities. So you look at this hamstring next to that one, or this hip flexor next to that one, things like that. And you try to see if there's a difference between them, and then overall, how much total range do they have? And you can start looking for deficits. So before they actually get an injury, you can start doing special exercises and things like that before they actually get on the court, to try to help prevent them from getting an injury, and because you see a predisposing condition. So that's how prevention in athletics works best. And I've spent probably more time than anything else in my long career with athletic training trying to do prevention.
So are these the same tactics that these professional organizations are using today, or has it changed over time since you've been?
It varies. I believe that a lot of them are doing dynamic warm-up now, and I believe that now they have so much more help. I mean, I'll give you an example. It was, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, but not long after the Kansas City Royals moved here, that for their spring training. It was, I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago now. But anyway, we have cadavers. And so they made an arrangement to come out and spend a couple of evenings with our cadavers. And the team orthopedic surgeon wanted all of the people who worked on the staff to come. And so basically, it was the team orthopedist, the team doctor that were there. They had a staff of 3 full-time physical therapists that worked with various levels. They had 5 certified athletic trainers and 6 exercise science conditioning people with CSCSs and things like that. That entire staff came to understudy cadavers. And so their team orthopedic surgeon led a lot of it, but we had a really top-notch anatomy professor at that particular time who I have the greatest respect for. And they came to learn some stuff from him. And they even asked me some stuff, which I was kind of surprised at because they had a team orthopedic surgeon. But I actually have spent 9 of my years doing cadaver anatomy. And I spent 3 years in grad school doing it as well. So I had a pretty extensive background in being in the cadavers myself. So I was able to point out a couple of things to people that I knew from that experience. But that's how big the staff was just for the Kansas City Royals. And when I was with the Suns, Joe Prosky, the athletic trainer, was the only full-time person. And then there were people like me who really didn't get paid to do that, but basically it was part of the service that Paul Steingart provided to the Suns in exchange for being able to be the team doctor. And he had that in that particular era. The Suns were the only professional team in Arizona. None of the other sports had pro teams for the longest time. So he kind of had a corner on the market. He was the team doctor of the only pro team in the state. And it was a big, significant reason why he got a lot of patients. So that was the trade-off, is I went and did a lot of this stuff so that our clinic would get advertised. So that, in fact, I've still got videos of me on Channel 15, Channel 12, Channel 3 back in those days when they used to come up and film the preseason practices. And there I am out there on the court stretching with all these guys and taking them through the program and so forth. And I'm in the background doing all this while they're interviewing the coach and interviewing Jerry Colangelo, who's the general manager, and things like that. But I'm in the background doing all the stretching.
Yeah.
But you see, that was the advertisement, because then people, are you the guy who's doing that stretching? Well, I sprained my ankle. I think we're going to come in and see you to get treatment. So I mean, that's the way it works. That
Yeah.
if people don't know who to go to, but then the Suns are using that guy. Yeah, what about him? Where does he work? Let's go find out where he is.
Yeah.
And so that's how I did it. And I spent a lot of my time of that 10 years doing that. I used to be the only person that would be at a lot of the state championships for the high schools. For example, I was treating a lot of the athletes, and so I'd go take care of the state track and field championships, and I'd go to all the sessions in the nights. I'd have my practice during the day, and I'd go to the sessions at night and on weekends. And they would start lining up because I'd have all of these people I was working with and these coaches that would bring people out to me to get their athletes treated. And I was pretty good at doing what I did. So I would go out there and I'd set up my athletic training table and have all my stuff, and they'd just come up. I'd have this line of like 30 people from all these different teams lined up for me to like tape their ankles or stretch them before they would run and do all these things. And so eventually that got us even more business. Eventually we had to hire extra people to work in that clinic. At one point, I started after the first year, my one therapy assistant and I were seeing 55 patients a day. And within a couple of years, we'd hired 2 more people and we're seeing 120. And, it just ballooned, the whole thing just ballooned. But that part of that was, I believe that if people see what you can do, that really gets you business, number one. And then number two is there's no better advertising in the entire medical field than word of mouth. Word of mouth is more important than anything else. That you get people that say that's the person to go to, that people will take that over anything else. Somebody they know who says, I went to this person and everything turned out well. And they'll make that decision that way over anything else. So it's very important to be the best professional you can be, and constantly try to be as thorough as you can, and try to impart confidence to people. And then those successes will lead to other people coming in and experience successes and so forth.
It it begs the question because while you were talking about that, you said you've worked with the Phoenix Suns, right? Kansas City Royals, way back in the day, California Angels.
Yeah, then and I didn't work for the Royals. The Royals happened to show up one day to our lab.
Oh,
And
okay.
so don't confuse that. Yeah. And in reality, I only worked for the Suns on retainer for 1 year.
Yeah.
But the rest of it was I was still involved with them a lot on those other times. I mean,
Right.
I did Don Buzzi's knee rehabilitation. I did Walter Davis's elbow. I had a bunch of those where I did the entire rehab process in our clinical setting.
Yeah. It just makes me think like, how do you take advantage of these opportunities? How do they come about? Are you just that lucky and they just came to you? Or do you put yourself out there? How did this all come about?
No, I have never really tried to advertise myself. I have tried to help others. And so I've spent a lot of athletic trainers will only work with their teams, but back in the day we had almost nobody. When I first got here, there were 5 athletic trainers at the high school level in the entire Phoenix metropolitan area. And virtually nothing outside of that. There were 3 or 4 in Tucson, and that was about it. So there weren't people. They didn't have anyone to ask. They didn't have anybody to talk to. So I tried to help people in a volunteer way, as much as I could, because I believe that's the Christ-like way to do things. That when people need help, you help them. And at the same time, I knew in the back of my mind, it wasn't the reason I did it, but I knew in the back of my mind that I was generating business at the same time. But I didn't ask for any of the business, didn't pass out my business card. Occasionally, people would come and ask me where I worked or things like that, and I would just tell them, but I didn't put myself out there. I just showed up and volunteered to help. And so that more than anything causes people to think about that because I didn't ask for anything from them for them to receive help. But isn't that what Jesus did? No, seriously. So if you're going to exhibit Christ-like behavior, then I believe that's what you need to do. So I was always one who was willing to help people from other teams and do other things.
So basically, you just do the right thing and you attract the right people.
That's kind of
Sounds
it.
cliche, and
Well, yeah.
like
Well, it is sort of that way, and plus it involves sincerity at the same time because I was sincerely interested in helping them improve and helping them get better. And yeah, there was a couple of times when I know that I helped somebody from another team to beat the team that was the one I was taking care of.
yeah,
But that's what kind of happens sometimes, you just have to, and most of the time the coaches and people that I've worked for have kind of supported that. You know, most coaches want to beat another team at their best. They don't want to win because a couple of players aren't playing because they got hurt, so now you can beat them. That isn't usually what coaches really want. They would just as soon be able to say we beat their best team, and we're proud of that kind of thing. So I've always seen it that way.
So if you could conclude this session with one big takeaway for someone watching, someone who's trying to go into this field or any field for that matter, what would you tell that person?
Uh, well, that is a good question. I think these days the thing is about exercise science is there are so many people practicing in personal training and in fitness who don't have college degrees. They've just been doing it for a long time. And they're fairly good at what they know, but they don't do anything to really increase their knowledge very much. And so when you start off in college, you start learning how to use research, how to go to the right journals, look up the right information, look up correct information. That's one of the number one things you get out of a program. And then secondly, you pass certifications. The certified strength and conditioning specialist with the National Strength and Conditioning Association called the CSCS. The national, let's see, what is it? The National Association of Sports Medicine, NASM, which produces a personal training certification. that you get a bachelor's degree and you get certified in these things, and then you do continuing education and you keep up with your knowledge, that's the best way to stay on top of things and to know you're doing the best, what we call best practice. Um, the best practice is what we call evidence-based, and so you've got to keep track of what the evidence is. But that's kind of it. So the profession of exercise science needs that in order to be able to be thought of in the same way that athletic training and physical therapy and occupational therapy are now. 50, 60 years ago, they weren't. I predate the athletic training national exam by 5 years. The physical therapist didn't have an exam before, oh gosh, it's either like 48 or 52, something like that. Prior to that, they didn't have a national exam. They didn't have any criteria set that people had that this amount of knowledge to enter the profession. So that's developed over time.
That reminds me of something I was thinking about earlier. Getting CSCS and other things, which is really good. What would you tell somebody who does want to get their master's degree, but they maybe don't have the best GPA from their undergraduate studies, and they're like, well, no one's going to take me. Should they just try to go for certificates and experience and then use that to try to get a master's school?
Well,
Or
here's my opinion on that. A lot of people will argue that you need to, once you get a bachelor's degree, you just ought to go ahead and get your master's while you're doing it, while you're there. And my problem with that is that there's a lot of places that don't necessarily want to hire you if you have a master's degree but no experience. They will pay somebody a bachelor's degree salary with no experience, but they generally have to pay people more when they have a master's degree. They don't want to do that because you aren't any better at working with clients than the undergraduate person. So what the idea is to go and work for a company for a couple of years, and then sometimes they will send you back to a master's program. Sometimes they'll even help pay for it, because if they decide they really want you and they want you to work your way up to being program director, manager positions and things like that with some of these organizations, then they want to send you to certain grad schools to learn certain things so you can come back and get that promotion and work your way on up the ladder with them. So it may be even cheaper for you later to go that way than it would be to try to get all that education at once and then not have any experience to go with it.
So you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting
Yes.
the work experience, the education, and the financial compensation.
That's kind of it, yeah. Yeah, a number of those places have been known for, oh, well, we'll give you time, at least we'll give you time off to go do this. We'll give you release time, things like that, and still pay you your salary. Sometimes they'll help you with tuition reimbursement or things like that for certain programs to come back with more education and then be of more help to them.
And which of these organizations are you like talking about, for example? Like I doubt I can just go to like an LA Fitness and after a few years they're like, hey, go get your master's degree, we'll pay for it.
Yeah, no, I think people have to go and shop around for that because to be honest with you, that changes with time.
Yeah.
Among other things, I haven't kept track anymore, but I don't know how many of those are continuing after COVID. So many of the organizations just really struggled financially because everybody stopped going to fitness centers for a while. And some of them, even in Arizona, they closed them. You had, I can't remember his name now, but the Mountainside guy fought court orders and was threatened with jail time because he kept reopening after they closed him. The county closed him, he'd open back up again.
We had a gym do the same thing back home.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And he just said, I can't, if I don't see clients, I'm going to go bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have any choice. Either I see clients or I lose everything that I put my effort into. And he's got Mountainside. He's his sole owner, and I think he's got like 19 fitness centers. And yeah, if he doesn't get people, he has to pay all these rental fees for facilities and all that stuff. And you have to be able to have that income from something.
For sure.
Well, Bill, we want to thank you for being on this podcast. We will bring him back. He has so much insightful information that people just need to hear in his own experience. He will be back on here next year, hopefully a few more times. So be on the lookout for that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, we just scratched the surface today. Really hoping we can get a little deeper into the whole motor control topic. Bill is also very well versed in philosophy and Christian worldview, so we'll be hoping to bring that up in a future podcast episode. So again, thank you so much for agreeing to be on with us, and we're really looking forward to next time with you.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you, Bill.
Mhm.
That was so good.